They say a man's intuition is never wrong about his own child. I wish they were right. My name is Nathan Brooke, and for 34 years, I've built my life on facts. As a quality control inspector at Patterson Manufacturing, I spend my days measuring tolerances, checking specifications, ensuring everything meets exact standards. Deviation from the norm catches my attention immediately. It's not just my job, it's who I am, which makes what happened to me all the more pathetic. I met Sarah 6 years ago at a company mixer. She was 26, a brilliant engineering graduate student working on sustainable manufacturing processes. I was 28, steady in my career, ready for something real. She had this way of tilting her head when she listened, like every word mattered. "You actually care about quality control?" she asked that first night. "Someone has to," I replied. "Without standards, everything falls apart." She smiled at my response. I like that. We were inseparable after that. Sarah moved in with me after 8 months. We talked about everything. Her dreams of revolutionizing manufacturing, my plans for advancement, the house we'd buy, the kids we'd have. She was brilliant, ambitious, and she chose me. The wedding came 2 years later. Simple ceremony, just family and close friends. When Sarah said her vows, I believed every word. "I promise to trust you completely," she said, looking into my eyes. "To build our life on honesty and love." I should have paid more attention to how easily those words came to her. For 4 years, everything seemed perfect. We bought a house in Maplewood, a colonial with a big backyard. Sarah landed a job at Henderson Engineering. I got promoted to senior inspector. We were building the life we'd dreamed of. Then Sarah's depression hit like a freight train. It started slowly. Missed dinners, canceled plans, spending weekends in bed. At first I thought it was work stress, but it got worse. She stopped cooking, cleaning, talking about the future. Some nights I'd come home to find her exactly where I'd left her, still in pajamas, staring at the television. "Sarah, talk to me," I'd say. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," she'd whisper in response. "I'm just tired." But this wasn't tired. This was something darker, swallowing the woman I married. I threw myself into research, systematically. I read about depression, talked to her doctor, made lists of therapists. Sarah resisted at first, but eventually agreed to try therapy. That's when I found Marcus Landon. Dr. Landon specialized in treating mental health professionals and high-achieving individuals. Harvard Medical School, published research, glowing reviews. His office was upscale, dark wood and leather, screaming competence and discretion. "I think you should see him," I told Sarah, showing her his website. "He has experience with people like you, smart, driven, successful." Sarah looked at his photo for a long moment. Dr. Landon was maybe 40, handsome in that distinguished professor way. "He looks professional," she said finally. "I'll call tomorrow," I promised her. I made the appointment myself, drove her to the first session, waited in the lobby. When she came out an hour later, there was something different in her eyes. Not hope exactly, but focus. "How was it?" I asked. "Good," she replied. "He listens, really listens." The change in Sarah was remarkable. Within 6 weeks, she was getting up early, making breakfast, talking about work with enthusiasm I hadn't seen in months. Within 3 months, she was laughing again, planning weekend trips, discussing our future. "Dr. Landon says I was avoiding intimacy because I was afraid of being vulnerable," she explained one night. "I was protecting myself by shutting you out." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I'm just glad you're feeling better." "I am," she said in response. "And I want to show you how much our marriage means to me." That night, we made love for the first time in months. Sarah was different, more confident, more present. She initiated things she'd never been comfortable with before, seemed to know exactly what she wanted. I attributed it to therapy, to her growing self-confidence. I was an idiot. 8 months after Sarah started therapy, she gave me the news that changed everything. "Nathan," she said, finding me in the garage organizing tools. She was holding something behind her back, practically vibrating with excitement. "I have something to tell you." I set down my socket wrench. "What is it?" She brought her hands forward, revealing a pregnancy test. 2 pink lines. "We're having a baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. The joy hit me like a tidal wave. I swept Sarah into my arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried simultaneously. "Are you sure?" I asked her. "I took 3 tests," she said breathlessly. "All positive. Nathan, we're going to be parents." I couldn't speak. I just held her, feeling her heart beat against my chest. After everything we'd been through, this felt like a reward for our patience, our love, our commitment. The pregnancy was smooth. Sarah glowed with health and happiness. We spent evenings debating names, James for a boy, Emma for a girl. We painted the nursery yellow, assembled a crib, bought a stroller. Sarah's mother flew in to help prepare. My parents started planning their first grandchild's college fund. I had never been happier. The future stretched ahead, bright and full of possibility. Sarah, recovered and thriving. Our baby, growing strong. Our marriage, deeper than ever. I thought I was the luckiest man alive. I had no idea I was already living a lie. James Nathan Brooke was born on a Tuesday in March, 7 pounds 3 ounces of perfect health. When the doctor placed him in my arms, I felt love so pure and overwhelming it nearly brought me to my knees. "He's perfect," I whispered to Sarah. "He looks just like you," she said in reply. But something flickered across her face, too quick to interpret, gone before I could analyze it. For 3 months, I was the happiest man on earth. I changed diapers, walked floors during midnight feedings, sang lullabies while James slept on my chest. I documented everything. First smile, first laugh, the way he gripped my finger with surprising strength. But slowly, quietly, questions began to form. When I held him for the first time, I felt pure love. It took 3 months for that love to turn into questions. The first thing I noticed was James's eyes. Sarah has green eyes, the color of sea glass. Mine are blue, inherited from my father. But James's eyes were brown, deep chocolate brown that reminded me of coffee grounds. "Baby's eyes change," Sarah said when I mentioned it during his 3-month checkup. "The pediatrician said so. Most babies are born with dark eyes that lighten over time." I nodded, accepting her explanation because I wanted to. But my quality control background had trained me to notice deviations from expected parameters, and James's eyes bothered me in a way I couldn't shake. That night, I researched infant eye color genetics. The science was complex but clear. 2 parents with light eyes could produce a brown-eyed child, but it required recessive genes from both sides. I traced my family history, blues and hazels going back generations. Sarah's family showed similar patterns, greens and grays. Possible, but unlikely. The probability bothered me. Then there was James's hair. Sarah has straight black hair, thick and glossy. Mine is light brown, slightly wavy. James's hair was dark like his mother's, but it had a curl pattern that didn't match either of us. Again, genetics could explain it, but my analytical mind kept cataloging inconsistencies. "He doesn't look like either of us," I said one evening during bath time. He was 4 months old, becoming more alert, more distinctly himself. Sarah's hands stilled on the washcloth. "What do you mean?" she asked defensively. "Just the eyes, the hair. People usually say babies look like their parents, but everyone who sees James just says he's cute. No one sees a resemblance." "Babies change," Sarah said quickly in response. "And besides, he has your chin. Trust me, Nathan, he's yours." Her tone was defensive, almost aggressive. That was new. Throughout our marriage, Sarah had been patient with my questions, my tendency to overthink. But now she seemed irritated by my observations about James. I started paying closer attention to her reactions. When my mother commented that James had such unique features during Sunday dinner, Sarah snapped at her. "Not every baby has to be a carbon copy of their parents, Helen. Genetics is more complex than that." My mother raised her eyebrows. "Of course, dear. I just meant—" "You meant he doesn't look like Nathan," Sarah interrupted. "I know what you meant." The table went quiet. Later, my mother pulled me aside. "Is everything okay with Sarah?" she asked me privately. "She seems tense." "New mother stress," I said automatically, but I didn't know how okay it was. Sarah's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic. She was defensive about James's appearance, evasive about his medical appointments, eager to return to work much earlier than we'd discussed. "I'm not going to be one of those women who disappears into motherhood," she declared when I suggested more time at home. "I have a career, Nathan. I have goals beyond diaper changes." These conversations left me feeling off balance, like I was missing some crucial piece of information. I found myself studying James when Sarah wasn't around, looking for some feature that would settle my growing unease. At 6 months, James was beautiful, healthy, alert, developing normally. But he still didn't look like me, or Sarah. His features seemed to belong to someone else entirely. The doubt was eating at me. I'd wake up at night and watch James sleep, this perfect little boy I loved desperately, and feel sick with questions I couldn't voice. What kind of father doubts his own son? But I couldn't stop noticing things. Sarah's therapy sessions with Dr. Landon had officially ended, but she still spoke about him frequently. Marcus says became a common preface to her opinions about child rearing and marriage dynamics. When I suggested couples therapy for new parent challenges, she dismissed the idea immediately. "Marcus thinks couples therapy is often counterproductive," she told me. "He says it's better to work through issues individually." "When did you discuss our marriage with Dr. Landon?" I asked her. Sarah's face flushed. "It came up during therapy. That's what therapy is for, Nathan, working through life issues." "But your therapy was for depression," I pointed out. "Why were you discussing marriage advice?" "Because everything is connected," she said impatiently in response. "My depression affected our marriage affected my depression." I wanted to believe her, but my instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The breaking point came during a family gathering. James was 7 months old, sitting up on his own. Sarah was holding him on her lap while he babbled at my cousin's daughter. "He's such a happy baby," my aunt commented. "And so handsome. Those eyes. It's funny he doesn't really look like either of you. Sometimes that happens. Babies favor grandparents. Do either of your families have those beautiful brown eyes?" Sarah's grip on James tightened. "Genetics is complicated," she replied curtly. After dinner, Sarah was unusually quiet on the drive home. James had fallen asleep in his car seat. "Your family asks too many questions," Sarah said finally. I glanced at her. "They're just making conversation." "No, they're making implications," she shot back. Her voice was tight with anger. "Every gathering, someone has to comment on how James looks." "They're not trying to be inappropriate," I said carefully. "Normal would be seeing the resemblance to his parents," Sarah snapped in response. "But apparently your family finds that impossible." That night, after putting James to bed, Sarah confronted me directly. "Do you think James is your son?" she asked, standing in our bedroom doorway with arms crossed. The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. I stared at her, heart pounding, aware that my answer would change everything. "Of course I do," I replied. "Because if you have doubts, Nathan," she continued, "if you're letting your family plant seeds of suspicion, then maybe you should examine why you're so quick to distrust me." Maybe you should talk to someone, Sarah added after a pause. Maybe you should see a therapist about why you're so paranoid. The word hit me like a slap. Paranoid. As if my observations were irrational. I could recommend someone, Sarah continued. Dr. Landon knows excellent therapists who specialize in anxiety and trust issues. I stared at her, processing the irony. She was suggesting I see a therapist recommended by the man I was increasingly suspicious about. I'll think about it, I said. That night, I lay awake cataloging everything that had led to this moment. James's brown eyes, his unfamiliar features, Sarah's defensive behavior, her frequent mentions of Dr. Landon, the timing of her pregnancy, 8 months after starting therapy. Some men live their whole lives wondering. I couldn't be one of them. The next morning, I researched discrete paternity testing services. Home kits, lab analysis, results in 3 to 5 business days. Complete confidentiality guaranteed. I read testimonials from other men in similar situations, men who'd trusted their instincts, men who'd chosen to ignore them. My finger hovered over the Order Now button for 20 minutes. Some men spend their lives wondering if they can trust their instincts. I couldn't be one of them. I clicked the button. The paternity test kit arrived 3 days later in a plain brown envelope addressed to me at work. Inside was everything I needed: cotton swabs, collection tubes, detailed instructions, and a prepaid return envelope. The process was simple. Collect cheek swabs from myself and James, seal them in provided containers, mail them back for analysis. Simple, but not easy. For 2 days, the kit sat in my desk drawer, unopened after that initial inspection. Every time I looked at it, I felt sick. What kind of father does this? What kind of husband suspects his wife of this level of deception without concrete evidence? But then I'd remember Sarah's defensive reactions, her evasiveness, the way she'd called me paranoid for noticing what everyone else noticed, that James looked nothing like either of us. On Friday evening, while Sarah was giving James his bath, I made my decision. I collected my own sample first, swabbing the inside of my cheek and sealing the cotton swab in its labeled tube. Then I waited. The opportunity came Saturday morning. Sarah had gone grocery shopping, leaving me alone with James for a couple of hours. He was napping in his crib, peaceful and unaware that his father was about to violate the trust between them in the most fundamental way possible. I stood beside his crib for 5 minutes, just watching him sleep. He was beautiful. Pink cheeks, long eyelashes, tiny hands curled into fists. I loved him completely, desperately, in a way that made my chest ache with intensity. He was innocent in all of this. "I'm sorry, buddy," I whispered to him, gently collecting the cheek swab. The collection process took less than 30 seconds, but felt like a lifetime. I sealed his sample, double-checked the labels, and packed everything according to instructions. That afternoon, while Sarah thought I was running errands, I drove to the post office and mailed the samples. Results in 3 to 5 business days. The waiting was torture. I went through motions of normal life, work, dinners, bedtime routines, while internally counting down hours until I'd know the truth. Sarah seemed to sense my tension. "You've been quiet lately," she observed Tuesday evening. "Everything okay?" "Just work stress," I lied. "Maybe you should take a vacation," she suggested. I almost laughed at the irony. A vacation. As if rest would solve the problem of potentially discovering my entire life was built on a lie. Wednesday and Thursday crawled by. I checked my work email obsessively, knowing the results would come there instead of home. Friday morning, the email arrived. Paternity test results, confidential, sat in my inbox at 8:47 a.m. I stared at the subject line for several minutes, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Once I opened this email, there was no going back. I clicked it open. The results were presented in clinical language, charts, and percentages that reduced the most important question of my life to cold scientific data. but the conclusion was unmistakable, printed in bold letters. Probability of paternity, 0%. Nathan Brooke is excluded as the biological father of James Brooke. The paper fell from my hands. I stared at my computer screen, reading the results again and again, hoping I'd misunderstood. But the science was clear. James was not my biological son. The nausea hit first, followed by dizzy disorientation that made me grip my desk to stay upright. 7 months. 7 months of loving this child, planning his future, believing he was mine. 7 months of Sarah's lies, of her calling me paranoid for noticing what DNA testing had now confirmed. I locked my office door and spent the next hour processing implications. This wasn't just about James. This was about Sarah's entire recovery narrative, her affair with Dr. Landon had apparently begun early in therapy, early enough that James could be his son. Everything Sarah had told me about healing, about rediscovering intimacy, had been cover for the biggest betrayal possible. I printed a second copy and placed both copies in separate sealed envelopes. One went into my office safe, the other went into my glove compartment, along with original kit packaging and tracking information. If this went to court, and I was already certain it would, I needed to document everything meticulously. That evening, I watched Sarah feed James his dinner, the same routine we'd performed hundreds of times. But now I saw it differently. The way she avoided my eyes when I asked about her day. The way she deflected when I mentioned James's upcoming appointment. "You're staring," Sarah said, not looking up from spooning pureed carrots into James's mouth. "Just thinking," I replied. "About what?" she asked. "James, how much he's grown, how much he's changed." Sarah's hand stilled for just a moment. "All babies change fast at this stage," she said defensively. "Do they?" I asked her. "Because he seems pretty consistent to me. Same brown eyes, same dark hair, same features that don't really look like either of us." This time her reaction was unmistakable. Her jaw tightened, and she set the spoon down harder than necessary. "We've been through this, Nathan. Genetics is complex." "Right," I said calmly. "Complex." Over the next 2 weeks, I observed Sarah with new eyes, cataloging behavior I'd previously attributed to new motherhood. She was secretive about her phone, taking calls in private rooms and deleting messages immediately. She'd started working late more frequently, claiming new project deadlines that seemed to coincide with Dr. Landon's office hours. I verified her stories carefully. The projects she mentioned were real, but the deadlines didn't match information on her company's website. The late meetings weren't reflected in her email calendar, which synced to our shared computer. Sarah was still lying to me, even now. The affair hadn't ended with James's conception. It was ongoing. The realization transformed something inside me. The loving husband died during those 2 weeks of observation, replaced by someone colder, more calculating. I began planning my next move with the same systematic approach I used for quality control inspections. I researched divorce law, focusing on adultery cases and prenatal paternity fraud. I learned about asset protection, child support obligations, and professional consequences for therapists who violate ethical boundaries. I contacted 3 different law firms, scheduling consultations under the pretense of theoretical legal questions. The prenuptial agreement Sarah had insisted on would actually protect me now. The infidelity clause was ironclad, and paternity fraud would void any claims she might have on my property. James wasn't my biological son, so I had no legal obligation for child support. As for Dr. Marcus Landon, his career was about to become very interesting. Patient-therapist relationships were strictly forbidden. I researched medical board complaint processes, ethics violations, and professional licensing consequences. I was going to destroy them both, systematically, thoroughly, and completely legally. But first, I was going to give Sarah one final chance to tell me the truth. I kept those results in my glove compartment for 2 weeks. Not because I doubted them. I doubted everything else. 2 weeks to plan how to destroy the woman who destroyed me. I chose a Friday evening for the confrontation. Sarah's parents were visiting her sister in Phoenix, so there would be no family interference. James was healthy and sleeping through the night, minimizing distractions. I'd taken a personal day from work, spending it finalizing documentation and preparing for what would likely be the last honest conversation Sarah and I would ever have. She came home at her usual time, 6:15, looking tired but pleasant. I watched her hang up her coat, kiss James on the forehead where he sat in his bouncer, and pour herself a glass of wine. "How was your day?" she asked, settling onto the couch beside me. "Educational," I answered. "How was yours?" "Long. The Morrison project is behind schedule, so we're all putting in extra hours," she replied, sipping her wine and studying my face. "You look tense. Everything okay?" I'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but now that it was here, I felt surprisingly calm. The anger I'd carried for 2 weeks had crystallized into something colder and more focused. "I want to talk about James," I said. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes, a wariness that confirmed what I already knew. "What about him?" she asked cautiously. "About how he doesn't look like either of us. About his brown eyes when we both have light eyes. About how everyone comments on his unique features." "Nathan," Sarah said, setting down her wine glass, "we've discussed this. Genetics is complex," I finished for her. "Yes, you keep saying that. But I'm not interested in genetics anymore. I'm more interested in timelines." "Timelines?" she repeated. "James was born March 15th, I said conversationally, "which means he was conceived around June 20th, right around the time you were making your breakthrough in therapy with Dr. Landon." Sarah's face had gone very still. "What are you suggesting?" she asked quietly. "I'm not suggesting anything," I replied calmly. "I'm stating facts. June 20th was approximately 8 months after you started therapy. It was also when you started mentioning Dr. Landon constantly. Marcus this, Marcus that. When you started getting better, more confident, more sexually adventurous." "Stop," Sarah said quietly. Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "You're being paranoid again," she declared. "Am I?" I asked her. "Because you know what I think? I think you've been calling me paranoid to cover your own guilt. I think you've been gaslighting me for months, making me feel crazy for noticing what everyone else notices. That James doesn't look like me because he isn't mine." She spun around, her face flushed with anger. "How dare you?" "How dare I what?" I interrupted. "Question the paternity of a child who looks nothing like me." "You're sick," Sarah spat back. "You're accusing me of adultery because our baby doesn't meet your genetic expectations?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the sealed envelope containing the paternity test results. "I'm not accusing you of anything, Sarah. I'm telling you what I know." Her eyes fixed on the envelope, and for the first time since I'd known her, Sarah looked genuinely afraid. "What is that?" she whispered. "DNA analysis," I said, opening the envelope and removing the papers. "Professional paternity testing, chain of custody documentation, scientific proof that James is not my biological son." I held out the results, watching Sarah's face as she read the conclusion. Her mask didn't just slip, it shattered completely. The woman I'd married disappeared, replaced by someone calculating and desperate. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I collected the samples myself," I told her. 0% probability of paternity, Sarah. 0. She sank back onto the couch, the papers clutched in her hands. For a moment, I thought she might finally tell me the truth. Instead, she rallied. "This is illegal," she declared. "You can't test a child without both parents' consent." Actually, I can, I replied calmly. I'm his legal father until proven otherwise, which I just did. Sarah crumpled the papers and threw them at me. You bastard! You sneaky, paranoid bastard! Tell me about Dr. Landon, I said calmly. There's nothing to tell, she insisted. Sarah, I have scientific proof that James isn't mine, and the timeline points directly to your therapy period. You can either tell me the truth or I can draw my own conclusions. She was quiet for a long moment, hands shaking as she reached for her wine glass. When she spoke, her voice was barely audible. It wasn't supposed to happen, she admitted. The confession hit me like a physical blow, even though I'd known it was coming. But it did happen, I stated. Yes, she whispered. She couldn't meet my eyes. It started as friendship. He was helping me through the depression, and I felt understood for the first time in months. When did it become physical? I asked. Another long pause. June, she answered. While you were still coming home to me, I said. While I was celebrating your recovery. She said nothing. Is it still going on? I pressed. Her silence was answer enough. Does he know about James? I continued. Yes, she whispered. Does he know James is his son? Sarah's face crumpled. We think so. The timing fits. You think so? I asked her. You're not certain? The dates were close, she admitted. You and I were still intimate sometimes. But Marcus and I were more frequent, and James looks more like him, so we assumed. You assumed, I repeated. I felt something break inside my chest. Not my heart, that had been broken for weeks, but something deeper. Nathan, I love you, Sarah said desperately. What happened with Marcus was a mistake, a moment of weakness when I was vulnerable. But I love you, and I want to work through this. Do you love him? I asked directly. The question hung in the air. Sarah's hesitation told me everything. It's complicated, she finally said. No, I replied firmly. It's really not. You had an affair with your therapist, got pregnant with his child, and have been lying to me for over a year. I walked to my desk and retrieved the folder I'd prepared. Copies of DNA results, timeline documentation, screenshots of Dr. Landon's credentials and ethics guidelines. Dr. Marcus Landon is about to have very interesting conversations with the medical board about his professional ethics, I told her. Patient relationships are strictly forbidden, Sarah. You can't do that, she whispered. I already have, I informed her. The complaint was filed this afternoon. Sarah shot to her feet. Nathan, you don't understand. If Marcus loses his license, he loses everything. Good, I said simply. Sarah began crying then, not gentle tears of remorse, but ugly, desperate sobs of someone who realizes their world is collapsing. Nathan, please. We can work through this. I'll end things with Marcus. We can go to couples therapy. How far did you mean for it to go, Sarah? I interrupted. Getting pregnant and pretending the baby was mine? Lying to my face while I questioned my own sanity? I panicked, she sobbed. When I realized I was pregnant, I panicked. You could have told me the truth, I pointed out. I was afraid you'd leave me, she replied through her tears. So instead, you decided to trick me into raising another man's child? I asked. I picked up the folder and moved toward the stairs. I'll be sleeping in the guest room from now on. I've contacted a divorce attorney, and you'll be served with papers next week. The prenup is clear about infidelity. You'll receive nothing. Since James isn't my biological son, I have no child support obligations. You can't do this, Sarah said desperately. I'll fight the divorce. I'll claim the paternity test was fraudulent. You'll lose, I said simply. I documented everything, Sarah. Every lie, every timeline inconsistency, every defensive reaction. That night I slept in the guest room for the first time in 7 years of marriage. Through the thin walls, I could hear Sarah crying. Not quiet tears of genuine remorse, but frustrated sobs of someone who'd been caught and was angry about the consequences. For the first time in 6 months, I slept through the night. The truth, even when it destroys you, sets you free. The divorce proceedings moved with mechanical efficiency, each step bringing me closer to freedom from the elaborate lie my marriage had become. My attorney, Margaret, specialized in complex domestic cases. She reviewed my documentation with methodical attention. "This is remarkably thorough," she told me during our second meeting. "DNA results, timeline documentation, professional ethics violations, prenuptial agreement with infidelity clauses. Your wife's attorney will have very few options." The prenuptial agreement, ironically championed by Sarah's father to protect her assets, became my shield instead of hers. Sarah had insisted on it during our engagement, claiming her father's business connections required protection. Now that protection worked in reverse. The infidelity clause was ironclad. Adultery voided any claim to marital assets, alimony, or community property. Sarah would leave with exactly what she'd brought: her personal belongings and whatever remained of her individual savings. "The prenup is brutal," Margaret explained to me. "Your wife literally has no legal standing. The adultery is documented, the timeline is clear, and paternity fraud constitutes intentional deception." Dr. Landon's professional destruction unfolded with satisfying completeness. The medical board investigation revealed that Sarah wasn't his first boundary violation. 2 other former patients came forward with complaints of inappropriate relationships. His practice collapsed as referrals disappeared and patients canceled appointments. His malpractice insurance was canceled. His professional reputation became unsalvageable. Most importantly, his ability to support Sarah and James evaporated along with his career. Sarah moved back to her parents' house in Westchester 3 weeks after I filed for divorce. Her father, who had initially supported her version of events, changed his tune after reviewing the DNA evidence and understanding the financial implications of the prenuptial agreement he'd insisted upon. "He called me yesterday," Margaret reported to me. "Apparently Sarah's father is furious that his daughter's stupidity triggered the very protections he'd put in place. He's refusing to financially support her long term." The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday morning in October, 6 months after I'd discovered the truth. Sarah didn't contest anything. She couldn't afford to, and she had no legal grounds anyway. I kept the house, the cars, the retirement accounts, and all marital assets. James, now 14 months old, was legally Dr. Landon's responsibility. I signed away any parental rights I'd never actually possessed, clearing the path for his biological father to assume full legal and financial obligations. I saw them once more, at the courthouse during the final hearing. Sarah looked exhausted, her previous confidence replaced by hollow-eyed desperation. James was on her hip, babbling happily at the fluorescent lights, unaware that his world had been completely restructured around him. Dr. Landon wasn't there. According to court records, he was fighting his own legal battles. The medical board had officially revoked his license, and he was facing potential criminal charges for professional misconduct. His ability to provide child support was non-existent. That evening, I walked through my house now completely and legally mine, and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: peace. The guest bedroom where I'd been sleeping would become a home office. The nursery would become a workshop. At work, my colleagues had noticed the change in me. Where I'd once seemed distracted and anxious, I now approached projects with renewed focus. My supervisor mentioned that my attention to detail had always been exceptional, but lately it seemed even more precise. The promotion came through in November: Senior Quality Control Manager, a position that opened when my predecessor retired early. The irony wasn't lost on me that my personal experience with deception and betrayal had somehow sharpened my professional ability to detect flaws and inconsistencies. I heard updates about Sarah and Dr. Landon occasionally, through mutual professional connections. Sarah had taken a job at a smaller engineering firm at significantly reduced pay. Dr. Landon was working as a consultant, trying to rebuild some semblance of a career without professional credentials. Their relationship had reportedly become strained under the financial and legal pressures. James would be fine. Children adapt, and he was young enough that he'd never remember me as anything more than a vague figure from his infancy. Sarah's parents, despite their anger at their daughter's choices, wouldn't let their grandson suffer. People sometimes asked about my divorce, fishing for details about what had gone wrong. I kept my answers simple. We grew apart, or we wanted different things. The truth was more complicated and uglier than most people could handle. But privately, I knew exactly what had happened. I'd trusted my instincts when everything else told me to ignore them. I'd refused to accept comfortable lies when uncomfortable truth was available. I'd chosen facts over emotions, evidence over wishful thinking. She called me paranoid, but paranoia implies irrational fear. I was never afraid of the truth. I was afraid of living without it. And so, we've reached the end of today's story. Was it what you expected, or did it take a twist you didn't see coming? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below, and let's get a conversation going. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or just haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring you fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.